The subject is leadership. We have a number of different models of leadership, some of them appropriate and others less appropriate in different situations. I want to begin by talking about one that is very elderly and yet very familiar. In this model, leadership comes from above. It comes down the hierarchy. The person in positional power leads, the person with less power follows. We see this in the church, for instance. The cardinal leads, the bishop leads the monsignor, and so forth, all the way down to the parishioner. And it's familiar in the family as well. When you grew up, your parents in a position of power, leadership, came from them and down to you. The parents lead, the children follow. It's a model that might not be totally perfect for the workplace, the modern workplace, particularly when, as is so often the case, we have a cross-functional team with many different skills. The boss, the person in positional power, may be master of some of those skills, but certainly not all. I think of the example of this kind of leadership as the old joke about the actor who asks his director, well, what's my motivation to say this to her? And the director says, your motivation is your paycheck. I find it hard even to laugh at that joke, because I've seen that model, that shut up and do as you're told model, too many times in the workplace. I have a different model that might be less familiar, but one that is happening whether you recognize it or not all the time in your organization. It's shown by this graphic and by the question that the graphic asks. Who's in charge here? Who's the leader? There's a story about John Lennon confessing to his friend Eric Clapton that he never was too secure on the whole matter of which is the on-beat and which is the off-beat in music, that if it came time to try to get the audience clapping along with the band, he'd be sure to let one of the others start it off, because if he started it off, he'd be likely to get it wrong. Okay, there are two things about this model. The first time I drew it and stared down at it in my pad, there were two things about this, about leadership, that I knew, but only one of them I had come to grips with fully. The first is that leadership is not exclusively a hierarchical phenomenon. That it is an act of leadership, when it comes at you, is sometimes comes from above, but just as often comes at you sideways. That leadership is a network phenomenon, as much as, or probably more than, it is a phenomenon of the hierarchy. And the second thing, which I'd also known, kind of in the bones, was that the role of leadership moves around depending on topic. So let's say you've built a system and people using the system are making a certain kind of error all the time. Of course, they blame themselves. They say, I read in the manual I should do it this way, but every time I do it, I forget and I do it the wrong way. And somebody says, maybe the human interface is wrong. Maybe we should design the human interface. At which point all eyes turn to the same person, the local human interface guru, Harvey or Eloise, whoever it is in your organization, because this is the person who has just inherited the role of leader, because the subject has turned his or her way. Now, I know when I was a young manager, insecure young manager, I might have bristled at that notion that somehow leadership was moving away from me and being taken over by Harry or Harvey or Eloise, whoever it is. Who the hell are they? I'm the leader here. So I might have, in the worst case, made the decision directly against whatever they were proposing, just because it would show that I was the leader. Not so good. I had another observation the very first time I stared down at this graphic, which was that in my own work experience, I had almost never seen a meaningful act of leadership that came downward. Almost always it was coming at me sideways. They were much more prevalent. Of course, there is something that looks like leadership that comes from above, because the people up in the stratosphere of the organization are the ones that are doing the strategic thinking. But I think it's important to note that strategic thinking doesn't make you a leader rather than tactical thinking. What makes you a leader is that people instinctively, because of the talents and skills that you have amassed, instinctively want to do what you're suggesting to them. And the people up higher in the stratosphere, are often unknown to you, and you are not so inclined to do whatever it is they're proposing just because they're the ones who are proposing it. So to sum that all up, the role of leadership is as likely to be a network phenomenon as a hierarchical one. The role of leadership, the role of leader seems to rotate depending on topic. And finally, if your experience is anything like mine, the network kind of leadership is probably a lot more common in your experience, happens much more often than the hierarchical kind. I wanted to finish this up with an allegory, if you will, a story that illustrates this. It's the story of Shahrazad and Shahryar. If you remember who they were, this is the tale of the 1001 Nights. Shahrazad is a young girl. She's a teenager, and she becomes the bride of this rather angry sultan who has been betrayed by the great love of his life, and he decides that he will have his revenge on women of all kinds. And so he marries each one for a night, and then has them dispatched the next morning. And Shahrazad is completely powerless. She has no positional power. I mean, she's a child. She's naked. She's without resources apart from her talent. All she's got going for her is her abilities, and she uses that ability to tell Shahryar a story. And as luck would have it, the story is not quite done by morning. And so the Sultan relents and says, well, keep her around for another day to see how the story worked out. And sure, she finishes that one off the next night, but then she has yet another. In fact, she's got 999 others. There's this story of the 1001 Tales. And she persists because of her talent. This is the idea of leadership without positional power. It's the kind of leadership that keeps organizations young and healthy and vibrant. It's the kind of leadership that is most important of all.